As the 20th century began, the United States of America found itself at a critical juncture in its history. Two wars with Great Britain, a devastating civil conflict that claimed the lives of over 1 million Americans, and multiple presidential assassinations had marked the nation's journey. Today, we are showing you how the United States became the most powerful country in the world. Theodore Roosevelt and the Progressive Era. At the outset of the 20th century, the unexpected rise of Theodore Roosevelt to the presidency had a profound impact on the nation. Initially chosen as McKinley's vice president to neutralize his influence, Roosevelt assumed the presidency after McKinley's assassination. Roosevelt, a pro-business Republican with progressive inclinations, brought a new energy to the office. He passed business reforms and sought to regulate burgeoning corporations like U.S. Steel and Ford Motor Company. Under Roosevelt's leadership, the United States saw remarkable economic growth and international expansion, acquiring the Panama Canal Zone, welcoming Oklahoma as a state, and becoming a prominent player on the global stage. Roosevelt's domestic and international policies set the stage for the country's ascent to power. What are your thoughts on Theodore Roosevelt's impact during the Progressive Era, both in terms of domestic reforms and international influence? Let us know in the comments below. Progressive movements and challenges. The early 1900s also witnessed the rise of progressive movements advocating for racial equality and women's suffrage. Groups formed to champion these causes, pushing for long overdue changes in American society. The nation faced daunting challenges, including natural disasters like the San Francisco earthquake and a tragic coal mine explosion in West Virginia. Amid these challenges, government agencies like the FBI and the Department of Commerce and Labor were established. Diplomatic relations with Japan were opened, expanding America's global reach. Despite these challenges, Roosevelt's second term was widely seen as a success, solidifying the United States' position as a growing global power. The Taft presidency and economic reforms. William Howard Taft succeeded Roosevelt in 1908, continuing many of his predecessor's policies. Taft's presidency focused on economic and labor reforms, leading to the breakup of the massive Standard Oil Corporation in 1911. The tragic Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York drew attention to workers' rights and safety. During Taft's tenure, New Mexico and Arizona were admitted as states, the Girl Scouts were founded, and significant cultural and economic developments occurred. However, Taft's presidency was also marked by political turbulence, as his mentor, Theodore Roosevelt, resurfaced with his Bull Moose Party. World War I, a turning point. World War I was a pivotal moment in U.S. history, marked by its brutality with over 2 million American men drafted and 100,000 casualties. On the home front, the Espionage and Sedition Acts led to the imprisonment of anti-war activists, sparking the first Red Scare. Additionally, Prohibition swept the nation, banning alcohol in 29 states. Despite the war's end in 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic claimed over 500,000 lives. President Wilson's stroke and his wife Edith's unofficial role as first female president ended his term. Congress rejected the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations, but did pass an amendment banning alcohol nationwide. How do you think World War I and its aftermath, including events like Prohibition and the Spanish flu pandemic, shaped the United States during this period? The Roaring Twenties. The 1920s, often referred to as the Roaring Twenties, commenced with Warren G. Harding's presidency. Despite his relative obscurity before his election, Harding's tenure was marked by economic prosperity. However, his administration faced scandals like the Teapot Dome scandal, where U.S. assets were allegedly sold off to private oil companies. Harding's sudden death in 1923 and the ensuing investigation tarnished his legacy. Calvin Coolidge took over as president, maintaining a relatively calm presidency. He supported racial equality, granted citizenship to Native Americans, and saw the rise of J. Edgar Hoover as the head of the Bureau of Investigation. Coolidge was easily re-elected in 1924. the Great Depression, and Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal. The 1920s concluded on a high economic note, but the following decade took a sharp downturn with the arrival of the Great Depression. Herbert Hoover, who was president at the time, struggled to address the economic crisis and made unpopular decisions, including vetoing a bonus for World War I veterans. The era was characterized by widespread unemployment, extreme poverty, and families moving to more affordable regions. Socialist ideas gained popularity, and the nation turned to Franklin D. Roosevelt for hope. Roosevelt's New Deal was a comprehensive set of government programs and reforms designed to rescue the country from the depths of the Great Depression. It included measures to stabilize banks, introduce Social Security, and establish various social safety nets. Additionally, Roosevelt appointed Frances Perkins as the first female cabinet official. Roosevelt's presidency faced challenges, including conflicts with the Supreme Court and rising global tensions. The space race began when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, and the United States encountered international crises like the Cuban Revolution and the Vietnam War. The 1960s, a decade of hope and turmoil. The 1960s began with hope and aspirations, symbolized by Martin Luther King Jr.'s iconic "I Have a Dream" speech and the civil rights movement gaining momentum. However, the decade took a dark turn with the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963, followed by a series of assassinations, including Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. Lyndon B. Johnson succeeded Kennedy and enacted sweeping economic reforms as part of the Great Society, along with landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Despite these achievements, racial tensions and anti-war protests grew, fueled by the escalating involvement in the Vietnam War. The 1970s, a decade of challenges and change. The early 1970s brought tragedy with the Kent State shootings and the deaths of iconic musicians Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. Meanwhile, President Richard Nixon's historic visit to Communist China marked a turning point in international relations. Nixon's second term took an unexpected turn with the Watergate scandal, leading to his resignation and Gerald Ford's presidency. The decade also witnessed the end of the Vietnam War, the fall of Saigon, and near assassination attempts on President Ford. The 1980s, Ronald Reagan's era and global change. Ronald Reagan's presidency defined the 1980s. Despite surviving an assassination attempt early in his term, Reagan implemented conservative policies, including tax cuts and a tough stance against the Soviet Union. The decade saw progress with the reduction of nuclear stockpiles and a thaw in Cold War relations. The 1990s, a decade of domestic and international challenges. The 1990s brought the Gulf War as Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, prompting international intervention. The Soviet Union's collapse marked the end of the Cold War. In the United States, President Bill Clinton faced scandals, including the Monica Lewinsky affair and the Oklahoma City bombing. The 2000s, a new millennium and the war on terror. The 21st century began with the contested 2000 election, ultimately resulting in George W. Bush's presidency. The September 11, 2001 attacks by Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda reshaped the nation's priorities. The Iraq War and the Afghanistan War followed as part of the global war on terror. The 2010s, a decade of change and social movements. Barack Obama's election as the first black president marked a significant moment in American history. His presidency tackled issues like healthcare reform and racial justice while facing opposition from the Tea Party. The decade also saw the rise of social movements like Black Lives Matter and the nationwide legalization of gay marriage. The period up to the 2010s was a time of profound transformation in the United States. It witnessed the struggle for civil rights, the trauma of assassinations, the end of the Cold War, and the challenges posed by terrorism. Through it all, the nation endured, adapted, and continued to evolve, leaving a lasting impact on its history and society.